Welcome back. In this video, we're just going to look at some terminology so that you can understand what we're talking about when we use the terminology. The first thing that we're going to commonly refer to is different types of brackets because in most programming languages we use quite a few different brackets. When you see these brackets here, we'll refer to those as triangular brackets or triangular braces. When you see these kind of brackets, we usually call them brackets or round brackets. And when you see these, we will call them braces. Okay? So that's the first thing. So keep that in mind. If you hear those terminology, you know these are round, these are triangular, and these are braces. So first things first is we did a simple program already, and we're going to break this down into very small steps and look at each part individually throughout the videos and lectures. But we'll just have a quick look at this so that you can understand some of the terminology. So this very first line, this is going to be explained in a lot more depth later in the subject, but right now this includes a library, so it gives us access to particular functions. Okay, so a function is basically a set of instructions that tells the computer to do something, and that's already written for us, and we can use that function. So these functions here, we include them, and what we are including is standard input output. And the reason we need this is because we want some functions to be able to display things to the screen and also collect things from the user via the keyboard. So our programs will be very boring without having access to these functions, and we're not going to write them ourselves with the limited knowledge that we've covered so far. Now the next thing is that you're going to see in pretty much the first 4 or 5 weeks is just this main function. Okay, so this is also a function, and this is called the main function. You had int here. Don't worry about what that means right now. We'll explain it when we reach functions. The name of the function is specified after that, which is main. It needs to be spelled exactly like this in this correct case. And then we've got 2 round brackets. You may have seen different ways to write this, where there's stuff inside the brackets. We'll get to that later in the subject. And you may have seen this as void. It shouldn't be void, it should be int, and we'll explain why later in the subject also. Then we have these braces. These are extremely important, and there shouldn't be anything outside of these for now. Okay, so when we reach functions, we'll see other functions outside of it, but for now, all of our code, other than our includes, will be inside it. Okay, so if you've got stuff outside of those 2 braces, you're doing something wrong. We're going to have more braces inside eventually, so it will get confusing, but the way that we keep it nice and easy for ourselves is we use this indentation such that we can see which brace matches which brace. So we should be able to follow this brace down, and we can see that it matches this brace here. Okay, so if you follow this indentation, which we talked about in the other video, you shouldn't get lost and confused later on. Okay. The next thing we've got here is some declaration. Now, there's a future video explaining what declaration is, and we've got some names here. Okay, so we've got A and B, and these are called variables. Okay, so they hold information, and you'll look at those in a little bit more detail soon as well. We've got literals, so they are basically a value that's explicitly expressed. So a 4, a 3, something that is literally that value. Now, I mentioned this in other videos as well. We don't call this a constant in C. Constants have a different meaning, okay? So it's called a literal, okay? It has a similar meaning to a constant in mathematics, but it's called literal. Now, basically with this, this is called a statement, okay? So is this. Basically, a statement is just a line of code that's doing something. You'll see this throughout, and we'll just refer to it as a statement or a line of code. Now, when we have a collection of operators and operands, this is called a expression. Basically, an expression is anything that ends up becoming a value, and we'll see this throughout the subject. We also here have on the next slide a function call. So when you see a name of a function, and here we've got printf, it will have some round brackets, and then inside of those round brackets it will have arguments. So basically what we're saying here is call the printf function and give it this information to do some operation on that information. Okay, so basically I'm saying call this printf, it will go to that function and execute that code, but it needs to be given some information to be able to do that, and so we give it some information. And we'll look at printf in the next videos. The last bit here is right at the end, and this should be right at the end of your main function. We'll explain more what this means later on when we get to functions, but this is the point where your program ends. So if you accidentally put return 0 here, then it'll never execute this part here. Okay, so you need to make sure it's the very last thing you've got there. Okay. All right, so that's just some basic terminology and looking through this and where we're going in the future. We are going to go through each one of these in depth, so don't be worried if this is a little bit too much. All right, cheers.